Hello everybody and welcome back, or welcome if it's your first time here. If you've watched any of my videos, you'll know I quite often ask people to suggest things they would like to see engraved. And that's really quite useful for me because it means I end up engraving things I've never thought about doing before. So I have to go and learn how to do them before I can then show you in the video. And the one I'm going to do today is one of those. I had a request to engrave a Siamese Fighting Fish, a Betta fish, which I had never thought of doing before, but it's really quite an interesting one, so that's what I'm going to do today. I have to say a big thank you to my sister who gave me this vase, which I'm going to engrave it onto. And the first thing I had to do was find a good photo that I could use, because I don't keep Betta fish, and I didn't think the local pet shop would be happy for me to go around with my camera and have the flash disturbing the poor little beasties. So I found a nice photo on the Unsplash website. I manipulated the photo a little bit to make it a little bit clearer for me. So this one is the original image. This one I have made just a little bit lighter, and you can see perhaps how some of the detail stands out a little bit better there. And this one is a grayscale image, which again, it shows me where a lot of the highlights are and lets me pick out some detail that I maybe wouldn't see so easily in this photo up here. In fact, we'll head off to the workbench in the back of my very cold, dark and dusty garage, and we'll see how that goes. The first stage of the engraving is for me to copy the main lines of the drawing onto the glass. And I do that using a little white Arkansas stone. Some people call this an Arkansas stone, but I remember reading years ago that at some point in history the people in Arkansas had actually passed a law to say that you had to pronounce it as Arkansas. So for me this is an Arkansas stone, but you might know it as an Arkansas stone. This is quite a cheap version of one of these stones because they can be quite expensive. But the reason I use this kind of stone is that it just marks the glass very, very, very lightly. And all I'm doing is going over and picking out the main lines. I'm not putting any great amount of detail, just the outlines where the mouth goes. And while I've got the little white stone, I will engrave a little bit of the eye. I'm cutting slightly into the glass with a white stone just to make a little hollowed out area for the dark pupil, I suppose. The eye of the fish, anyway. And the white Arkansas stone is the best one for me to do that with. It leaves a very, very, very smooth finish. And it can cut into the glass quite well if you give it time. With the main lines on, I move to, in this case, it's a small diamond bar. And what I'm trying to do at this point is just look for some of the main points of highlight on the fins here. I'm not going to put in a huge amount of detail here because I'm actually going to be engraving right over the top of some of these. But it helps me to just define where the edges of the fin are going to be by picking out the ends of the little ribs, the tips of the ribs of the fins. But again, I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time on this because some of this detail is going to disappear when I engrave over the top of it in the next stage. At this point though, I'm also marking in a little bit more detail of where the eyes go because it's really quite important that the eyes end up in the right place. It looks very, very strange if you put them in wrongly. So marking them in with the diamond bar just now helps me to get those details. Now, the main bit of engraving the fin involves getting a fairly smooth texture. onto the fin. They're all sort of light and floaty and very, very smooth other than the ribs. So to get that, I'm using quite a large green silicon carbide stone and just working my way across the fin. Now I've started with the fin, which when I look at the picture appears to be the furthest away from me, because that way when I engrave the later bits of the fin, they'll come over the top of it and look a little bit closer. But I've started with this one that looks to be the furthest away, and I am just engraving down the surface. And although I'm looking for quite a smooth finish with this green silicon carbide stone, I'm still following the lines of the ribs of the fin. Doing that actually does create little, I suppose, parallel lines of indentation in the engraving, which you won't see in the video here, and unless I look very closely I can't see it in the engraving, but it does add to the feeling of the shape and the texture of the fin to have those in there. So it's quite important not to just randomly engrave back and forward with the green stone, but to follow the lines of the ribs in the fins as you go. And I'm still continuing on this fin at the back, and here the ribs are lying in a slightly different direction, so I run the stone differently down the fin. It's not any more complicated than that. And that's most of the basic work done with the green stone. Now, I've moved on to a white Arkansas stone again, because although I'm looking for a smooth texture for the majority of the fin, it does have lots and lots of little ribs on it. And there are lots of areas of shadow, dark lines caused by these ribs. Using the white Arkansas stone, I am pre-polishing the fin in these long lines or in areas where I think there's going to be a lot of shade. Again, you might not see the effect of it very clearly in this picture, but what that's doing is it's smoothing down areas of the engraving that I've done already. It's making them just a little bit smoother. So I'm carefully looking for where the lines of shade are and putting those in, so that when I come back with a polishing rubber, I can pick up on those lines of shade. And because they've been pre-polished with the white Arkansas stone, they can come in very, very dark indeed, which is quite handy. If I hadn't pre-polished them, I wouldn't get this effect of light and dark lines following the ribs of the fin. So it's worth taking the time to pre-polish it. Now, the areas of shadow in this little bit of the fin are not so much in long straight lines, it's a little bit more mottled. There are some lines, but again, what I have to do is look closely at the picture, look at those areas where I think the shadow will be darkest, and use the white Arkansas stone to polish those out, pre-polish those, and then come back with the, in this case it's a grey polishing disc, and polish those a little bit more so that the shadows show up quite clearly. Now, I've got the shadow in, but I need light. You need the white and the dark to make this really show up well. So I've gone back to a small spherical diamond bar, and looking at the picture, I'm picking out those areas of highlight now. So the green stone gives me a mid-tone, the white Arkansas stone and polishing it gives me the dark tone, and coming back in with the diamond bar now is giving me the whitest tone on the fin. And I have to work my way over all of the fin, picking up areas of highlight at the tips of the fin and where it runs down some of the ribs. So it's just at the tips and then down some of the ribs. I'm not engraving over all of the shadow that I put in. I need that as well. But you need the both, the highlight and the shadow. And I'm going to repeat that process for the whole of the fish and then move on to the body. The white lines that you can see that I've drawn into the back of the fish here, they're just drawn with a white Chinagraph pencil, and that's so that I can see where to put the little marks for the back of the body of the fish. And I'm using a small round spherical diamond bar and just putting those marks in, because in this fish the scales are so small that you don't really see them. You just see the lights and darks and the texturing in the tail. But these little sort of light dots are quite visible on the back of the fish, so it makes sense to put those in first with the diamond bar. Just following down the lines that I had marked out. That white Chinagraph pencil comes off quite easily, so it's fine for this. And some of these I'm going to want to be a little bit less white. So I'm going over those with a white Arkansas stone, and others need to be quite dark again, so I'm actually putting in a few extra ones that I need to be a bit dark, but only using the white Arkansas stone to do that. And while I have the stone, I will mark out the line at the back of the body a little bit more clearly, make a nice smooth line for that. And at the moment the only thing engraved on here, of course, are these little dots, and we need the whole of the body to be engraved, otherwise it just looks a bit weird. So while I have the white Arkansas stone, I'm going over this area of the fish's body. Now I'm obviously working between these lines of dots that I've put in previously, but you can sort of run over the top of them with this stone, because they were engraved with a diamond bar, so they're a little bit deeper, a little bit below the surface of the glass. So long as I don't press too hard or let the stone sit for too long, it'll continue and engrave over the top of them, and the marks will still be there. And you can maybe see that in this picture, although I've engraved over it, you can still see the little dots that I had previously done. And this part of the fish's body is really quite dark, so again I've picked out a polishing rubber. This is a bullet-shaped grey rubber, just running that up the body, trying to find the areas of shadow, and doing that also makes those little dots stand out a bit more clearly, although there's some of them I obviously think need to be a little bit whiter, so I've come back with the tiny little diamond bar, and I'm just going over those ones that I think need to be a little bit brighter, a little bit whiter, to show up a little bit better. Hopefully you can see in the picture how that lightens those. And then the final polishing at this stage with a tiny little pin rubber. Again, working just in the areas where I think the shade needs to be the darkest. These tiny little rubbers are quite useful for getting into the smallest areas of the engraving. And now it's time for the rest of the fish's body. If you look at the picture, and I have attached a copy of the picture to a link in the description, the scales on this fish are not particularly visible, but there is a lot of mottling, a lot of texture on the back. And to try to get that effect, what I've done is I've taken a tiny little green silicon carbide stone, and I am putting in little areas of light along the back. Now, as I did with the fin, I'm paying very close attention to the direction that I engrave those in. The ones on the back of the fish can go more or less straight across. The ones on the left-hand side, as you look at it, need to be angled slightly up the way. The ones on the right-hand side are angled down the way, because that's how they curve around the surface of the fish. But I just keep going with this little green stone and putting in these little areas of mottling. But unlike what I did for the fin, where I engraved the whole surface with the green stone, I'm leaving tiny little areas which at the moment are not engraved and are darker in between the little marks I'm making with the green stone. Hopefully, once they're all done, this will look similar to the mottling caused by the scales on the fish. But I just have to work my way around this whole area, doing my best to get the right shapes and sizes. I've changed now to a white Arkansas stone, and I'm using, you maybe notice, the same action of these little short strokes going over where I have put some of the marks previously. That will, in the end, make this area a little bit darker, and it also helps to tone in some of those unengraved areas in between the original strokes made by the green Arkansas stone. The green Arkansas stone, did I say that? Green silicon carbide stone. I continue using this white Arkansas stone. I'm just tidying up the edge, making it look quite smooth. And having done that, what I've got this time is a black polishing rubber disc. Now the black rubber is quite hard, which means that it tends to polish any bits which are not so heavily engraved, but right over the top of any bits that have been engraved a little bit deeper. So that should allow me to go over all of this engraving, tone it all in, but not take away the glass which causes the mottling in the first place. I hope that makes sense. It should be riding over the top of the little hollows cut with the green silicon carbide stone. Nearly got that wrong again. Although I've done that, I still need to make sure that some of these areas are quite white, quite light, because if you look at the picture, that's what you see. So back to the little green silicon carbide stone, and just those areas that need to be lightest, I'm going over the marks again, and I'm using the same marks that I made the first time. I'm not creating a whole series of new marks, because remember, I want the shadow between them. Now it's time to finish off the mouth, and I can use the white Arkansas stone to pre-polish areas that I'm going to want to be very, very, very dark. And a little bit around the eye as well, because there are some darker areas around about the eye that I'm going to want to polish in. Same on the other eye. These little white stones are very useful. And then I'm back to the tiny little pin rubber, polishing the darkest areas around about the eye, and then down and doing the same around about the mouth. And although I've done that, I obviously still think that we need to get more dark area into the pupil of the eye. So I'm back again with that white Arkansas stone, pre-polishing a little bit more. A little bit more around the mouth. It's not dark enough for me yet. So I need to get that engraved nice and smooth so I can then polish it and create a nice bit of shade in there. And so now when I come in with the polishing rubber, I can get as dark a tone as I can possibly get into the eyeball, and then into both eyeballs, and then down and into the mouth. Again, I'm looking to pick up highlights, because this area of the body is the lightest area. So I've moved this time to a spherical diamond bar, and picking out some of those areas that I'd created. I also think I need a little bit more light at this point in the body, because I don't want it to look too flat. I want it to look as if there's a curve on it. So using the white Arkansas stone actually creates that sort of mid-tone, which will hopefully make it look a little more rounded. And a final little polish down around the mouth as well. Oh, and a little bit more around that eye. I'm getting very picky about the eye, surely. And there's a little highlight at the top of the eye and a little bit at the bottom, which I can pick out with the tiny little round diamond bar. At this point, although you don't see it, what I do is I'll take this engraving away and leave it for a day or so, and then have a really good look at it and decide what I need to do to finish it off. Usually what I'll do is I'll write out a list of things that need to be done. So I obviously felt that the area underneath the fish's head there needed to be a little darker, and I've gone over that with the white Arkansas stone and then polished it again. The highlights at the tips of the fins I felt needed to be a little lighter, so I've taken a tiny little round diamond bar and I'm just going over those areas to highlight the very brightest areas on the fin. And that continues on until I'm happy that I've picked out as many highlights as I need and got all the shadows. And then we get a finished fish. So that's today's little project finished. I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed the whole process of engraving this little fish onto the vase. So much so that I actually went ahead and gave him a little friend. It was huge amounts of fun, a bit of a challenge getting the texture right on the tail and getting the layering right on the tail, because it floats and twists over itself. So you have to pay a lot of attention to the shadow and the layers as you're engraving. But great fun and definitely worth doing. I hope you've enjoyed it, that maybe you've got something out of that you can apply to your own engraving. If you have, then consider please subscribing and clicking the notify button. And otherwise, I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.